She mixed up the cups, ended up in the hospital, and exposed exactly who she was with. It started with a sandwich. I had an hour free, just one, out of an otherwise stacked day, and I thought it would be nice to use it to surprise my wife. That's all it was supposed to be. A short break from work, a quick stop at the deli, her favorite order, and home in time to catch her before she got too deep into one of her afternoon cleaning projects or halfway through reorganizing the spice rack like she sometimes did when she got bored. She didn't have a job. She was home every day, so I figured she'd be there, probably wearing one of those old oversized t-shirts she used for housework, hair up in a loose tie. No makeup, but still beautiful in that casual, effortless way. I imagined her laughing when I walked through the door, maybe teasing me about how random it was, asking what was wrong with me to just show up like that out of the blue. But I figured she'd be happy. It had been a busy week, and we hadn't seen much of each other except in passing, me getting home late, her already half asleep on the couch or in the shower. So I thought, yeah, let me do something small. Something nice. I grabbed the sandwich, 2 drinks, and turned off my phone as I got into the car. No distractions. Just a simple moment between us. Our neighborhood is the kind where every house has its routine. You learn the rhythms, who leaves when, which windows stay open, whose dog barks at passing cars, what time the trash cans roll back. I turned onto our street and instinctively glanced toward our house. But her car wasn't in the driveway. It wasn't in the garage either. My first thought was maybe she stepped out, maybe a quick errand or a coffee run. But then I saw it. Her car, parked just a few houses down, in front of our neighbor David's place. It was unmistakable. The scuff on the back left bumper, the personalized plate frame she'd picked out herself. I eased off the gas just a little and stared at it as I passed, brain not really connecting the dots yet, just noticing, just taking in the image without reacting. David, my neighbor for years. We weren't close like brothers, but we were friendly. He used to come over for beers during football season. I'd helped him build his deck last summer. He borrowed tools. Sometimes I'd ask him to watch the house if we left town. He'd been through a rough divorce a couple of years back, and my wife had always been sympathetic, maybe a little too sympathetic in hindsight, but I never thought much of it. He was around a lot. Familiar. Harmless. I pulled over 2 houses down from his, out of sight but close enough to walk. I didn't even know why I was doing it at first. Maybe curiosity. Maybe instinct. I left the sandwich in the passenger seat, stepped out slowly, and walked the sidewalk toward David's house like I was on autopilot. I didn't feel nervous yet. Not even suspicious. Just off. Something about the scene felt out of place, like the rhythm of the neighborhood was just a little too quiet. The blinds on his front windows were pulled halfway, sunlight cutting sharp lines through them. I didn't mean to sneak. I didn't mean to snoop. I was just going to knock on the door. That was all. Just see if she was there, maybe laugh it off, maybe she was borrowing something. But as I reached the side of the porch, I stopped. Not because I saw something, because I heard it. A sound. Low, then higher, then another. It came through the cracked open side window. Soft, but rhythmic. At first I couldn't place it. Then I could. I knew what I was hearing, and I couldn't move. My feet froze where they were. The heat rushed out of my face. It wasn't talking. It wasn't background noise. It was personal, unmistakably intimate. The kind of sound you don't fake, don't stage, don't imagine. It wasn't just the sound itself. It was how close it was. How real. How raw. There was no mistaking it. There was no mistaking her. That's the part that hit me like a slap. The voice I'd heard 100 times in our bedroom, in the dark, in the quiet. That voice was now coming from inside someone else's house, in the middle of a weekday, just steps from where we lived. I didn't knock. I didn't call her name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, hand inches from the window, heart beating like it didn't belong to me anymore. I backed away slowly, not out of fear, out of something worse, something colder. My entire body felt like it had been numbed, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. Everything in that moment was suddenly clear. I turned and walked down the sidewalk like a ghost, steps quiet, breath shallow. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't glance at the car again. I just kept walking, back to my own driveway, back into my house. My house. The same place where I'd imagined surprising her with a sandwich 15 minutes earlier. I walked in, set the food on the counter, sat down at the table, and stared straight ahead at nothing. The silence was unbearable. Not because it was loud, but because now I knew what it was hiding. I didn't say a word when she came home. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't mention the sandwich still sitting in the fridge or the way my hands had trembled when I set it down earlier. I didn't bring up her car or the cracked open window or the sounds that were still echoing in my head even hours later. I just waited, sat there, let her walk through the door and start playing her part like she always did, as if the script hadn't changed. She breezed in with a bag of groceries, humming like it was any other evening, keys jingling as she dropped them in the bowl by the door. She smiled when she saw me, didn't even look surprised. Just walked into the kitchen and said, "Hey babe, you're home early." I told her my meetings ended ahead of schedule, nothing suspicious in my tone. She unpacked vegetables onto the counter like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just been crossing lines she never should have, just a few doors down, like she didn't have someone else's breath still on her skin. I watched her for a while that night. Just watched. Not with anger. Not even with pain, really. More like fascination. The way she chopped onions. The way she talked about reorganizing the linen closet. She said she'd been home most of the day, cleaning and getting things in order. Did a load of towels, ran the dishwasher, even started prepping the pantry. She said like it was something to be proud of. I nodded. Said it sounded productive. I asked what she'd had for lunch, and she said she wasn't really hungry, just snacked on crackers and fruit. I asked if she'd gone out at all. She said no, hadn't left the house. Not even to walk around the block. Just one of those days where you get in the zone, you know, she said. I nodded again. Looked at her. Really looked. There wasn't a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Not a stutter in her voice. If I hadn't been standing outside David's house earlier that day, if I hadn't heard her myself through that open window, I might have believed her. I didn't sleep much that night. Just laid there in the dark, listening to her breathing beside me. Calm. Rhythmic. Innocent. Like nothing had shifted. But everything had. The bed felt colder. The silence sharper. I turned onto my side and stared at the wall, counting backward in my head to try and calm the pounding in my chest. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. What I felt now was something different. Something harder. A kind of stillness I'd never known before. Like the version of me that used to laugh at her jokes and trust her completely had been sealed in a box and buried somewhere under the floorboards. The man who laid awake that night wasn't the same one who had driven home with a sandwich and a smile that afternoon. That man was gone. The next morning she acted like everything was fine. She wore one of my old t-shirts to make breakfast, smiled over her shoulder while flipping eggs, kissed me goodbye at the door. I let her do it all. But I was watching now. Not reacting. Not accusing. Just watching. Every word she said. Every place she claimed to go. Every hour she said she was home alone. I kept mental notes. I didn't start an argument. I didn't accuse her of lying. That would have ruined it. I wanted her to keep pretending. I wanted to see how far she'd take it. What she'd try to hide. How confident she really was in her performance. I started paying attention to things I'd never looked at before. The laundry pile. The timing of her showers. How often she opened the windows. Which lights she turned on in which rooms. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Just waiting for the cracks to show. They always do. She said she was cleaning the bedroom one day, but the vacuum lines didn't look fresh. She said she made lunch at home, but the stove was cold and the trash empty. Tiny details. But together, they painted something ugly. Something she didn't think I'd notice. And the way she smiled through it all, so natural, so sweet, it made my skin crawl. I drove past David's house on purpose sometimes, just to see if her car was there. It wasn't always, but twice in the same week it was. Same spot, same time. Both days, she told me she hadn't left the house, that she'd spent the afternoon reorganizing the cabinets and sorting out old clothes for donation. She told me those stories with a straight face, like they were facts, like I wasn't watching her unravel without even knowing it. I never asked questions. I let her lie, over and over. I wanted her to believe she was getting away with it. That was the only way I'd ever get the truth without asking for it. There was something chilling about how easy it was for her. How she could look me in the eye and tell me about her day, talk about dinner, remind me to take the trash out, all while slipping in and out of someone else's arms a few houses down. I wondered how long it had been going on. I wondered if it had started slow, with little moments, too much eye contact, an accidental brush of the hand, a shared laugh that lingered. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for one lazy afternoon when she thought I'd be too far away to come home early. But the moment had happened. I had come home. And now I knew. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to start digging. Enough to wait. Enough to be patient. Because the best kind of truth is the kind that reveals itself. Not the kind you drag out into the light. The kind that falls apart on its own. That's what I was waiting for now. For her world to start slipping. For the lies to stop lining up. For her to hand me the proof without realizing she'd done it. There's something cruel about how betrayal hides in the details you almost miss. A wrinkle in a shirt sleeve. The sound of a shower starting 10 minutes earlier than usual. A smile that's just a little too practiced. I had been watching her for days now, letting her lie to me with confidence. Letting her tell stories about errands she didn't run and meals she didn't cook. Keeping quiet while her world unfolded exactly how she thought I wanted it to. She moved through our house like everything was normal. She played her part perfectly. She folded blankets, dusted shelves, kissed my cheek in the mornings. But the longer I stayed silent, the more she relaxed. She stopped being careful, and that's when the mask started to slip. It was the laundry that did it, not some dramatic discovery. Just a pile of clothes in the hamper that had built up over a few days. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. She liked handling it herself. Said she had a system, said I folded wrong. But that day she'd left early to return something at the mall, and I had a free hour before heading out. I figured I'd help. Maybe the act of doing something would shut my brain up for a while. I started sorting shirts and socks, separating darks from lights like she always insisted. Then I picked up one of her t-shirts. Buried underneath, it was something else. A men's shirt. Gray. Soft. Not mine. I don't own anything in that fabric. At first, I didn't react. I held it, turned it over, wondering if it had gotten mixed in from an old donation pile. But then I caught the scent. Not sweat. Not detergent. Cologne. Strong. Familiar. David. I didn't even have to guess. It hit me like a memory I hadn't asked for. I knew that smell. He wore it all the time. It lingered in my garage once after he'd helped me install shelving. I used to tease him about how strong it was, how he could knock over a candle just by walking past it. There it was again, soaked into the collar of a shirt that had no business being in my house, in my laundry basket, in her hands. I stood there holding it, everything around me going silent. The washer beeped behind me, but I didn't move. I just stood in that laundry room with the shirt dangling from my fingers, the final puzzle piece sliding perfectly into place. She had stopped being careful. That was her mistake. I didn't confront her. I didn't storm out or leave the shirt on the bed like a threat. I stuffed it back into the pile, started the wash like nothing happened, and walked out. I smiled when she got home. Asked if she found what she needed at the mall. She said yes. Showed me a new candle she'd picked up, lavender and mint. She held it under my nose and asked if I liked it. I said it was perfect. She lit it that night during dinner and complimented the way I'd set the table. "You're getting good at this whole domestic thing," she joked. I laughed, took a sip of my drink, said nothing. I watched David more closely after that. Not openly, just small things. The timing of when he pulled into his driveway, when his trash cans rolled to the curb. I caught sight of him one afternoon across the fence. He looked tired, pale, said he wasn't feeling great. Something in his throat. Probably just a cold. "Try tea with honey," I said casually. Old trick from my grandfather. He nodded, said he hadn't tried that in years. I remembered we had some raw honey in the pantry, bought months ago by accident, since we don't keep it around for obvious reasons. My wife is allergic. Not just mildly. It's a real allergy. The kind that sends her into hives if she so much as eats a spoonful by mistake. We don't have it in the house. We don't cook with it. We don't order dishes with it at restaurants. But that jar had been sitting in the back corner, untouched. Something I kept meaning to throw out. That day I grabbed it, walked next door, gave it to him. "Just a little," I said. "It's strong stuff. Hope it helps." He thanked me and looked genuinely grateful. I didn't give him the honey to set a trap. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just going through the motions, being a good neighbor, playing the part. But the irony didn't escape me, not even a little. I handed him something that wasn't supposed to be in our lives anymore. Something that had always been a risk if it ever got close to her. And now it was in his house, on a shelf, in his tea. Days passed. Quiet ones. No more shirts in the laundry. No strange cologne. She didn't mention David at all, but I saw her car parked in front of his house 2 days later while I was pulling into the neighborhood. I didn't stop. I didn't text. I just kept driving, went to the gym, and came back like I hadn't seen anything at all. But something was shifting. I could feel it in the air. like a storm building behind a wall you couldn't see through yet. And when the phone rang that following afternoon, I didn't know exactly what had happened, but I knew it was coming. It happened on a Thursday. The kind of afternoon where everything feels routine, like the week's already winding down and nothing unexpected should be happening. I was at work, sitting through a forgettable meeting about next month's logistics calendar, barely listening, nodding when I was supposed to, thinking mostly about what I'd cook for dinner. I remember tapping my pen against the table, eyes drifting toward the clock, and then my phone vibrated. Unknown number. Local code. I almost ignored it, assuming it was spam. But something stopped me. A quick instinct. I stepped out of the meeting and answered. The voice on the other end was calm, clear, but serious. "Is this the emergency contact for wife's name?" the woman asked. My stomach dropped. "Yes," I said, suddenly cold all over. "What's going on?" She introduced herself as a paramedic. "Your wife is being transported to the hospital," she said. "She's experiencing an anaphylactic reaction. She was found in distress. She's stable now, but we're acting fast." I didn't ask how it happened. I didn't ask where. My first thought, my only thought, was honey. That was the only thing that ever triggered something this serious in her. I knew her allergy. I knew the consequences. We never kept it in the house. Never used it. She checked labels on everything, asked about ingredients even at restaurants. One spoonful could send her into full-body hives. Swelling. Trouble breathing. Once, years ago, she accidentally took a bite of a glazed pastry at a friend's house, honey in the crust. She didn't sleep for 2 days. I remembered that clearly. I also remembered the way her hands shook as she told me it scared her more than anything else. She called it her ticking time bomb. Now it had gone off. And I didn't know why. The paramedic told me which hospital. I hung up without asking anything else. The only thing I could hear in my head was her voice from the past, saying I'm okay as long as I'm careful. And now she wasn't okay, which meant something had slipped. Something had gone wrong. Or someone else had been careless. I grabbed my keys, didn't speak to anyone on the way out, just walked straight to the car with the kind of tunnel vision you only get when your world suddenly shrinks down to one person and whether or not they're still breathing. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every red light hit. Every minute crawled. My thoughts were racing but incomplete, spiraling without answers. Where had she been? What had she eaten? Who had she been with? Was she alone when it happened? Did she call for help? Had someone else called for her? I hated every second of not knowing. The steering wheel felt too tight in my hands. I glanced at the time again and again, uselessly, like watching the numbers would speed them up. I pulled into the hospital parking lot and rushed inside. The air smelled like antiseptic and cold plastic. I gave her name at the front desk, and the woman behind the counter tapped at her keyboard, then looked up. "She's here," she said. "Came in by ambulance. Allergic reaction. She's being seen now." I nodded and tried to ask how bad it was, but she only said, "They're stabilizing her. You can wait there." So I waited, heart pounding, hands tapping restlessly against my knees. I looked around the waiting room at the muted television, the potted plant in the corner, the row of chairs lined up like a funeral. I didn't know anything yet. Not how it happened. Not where she was. Not who had been there when it started. I didn't even know if she was conscious. I just knew that she was here, in this building, because something had entered her body that never should have, and it was serious enough to bring paramedics. I sat forward in the chair, elbows on my knees, trying not to think about all the ways this could have ended worse. Trying not to picture her struggling to breathe, skin flushed, hands clawing at her throat. Trying not to picture her being held by someone else. Not yet. I didn't go there. I just waited. Focused on the door she'd come through. Waited for a nurse. A doctor. A word. Anything. They called us into a consultation room after what felt like a lifetime of waiting. It was cold, like every hospital room, lit by that overly bright ceiling glow that makes everything feel sharper than it needs to be. Her parents stood up first. Her mother clutched her purse with both hands, trembling slightly. Her father's jaw was clenched the way it always was when he didn't want to show fear. I stood with them, not saying a word. A doctor came in a few seconds later, early 40s, white coat, clipboard, neutral expression. He introduced himself, but I didn't catch the name. My heart was beating too hard in my ears. I only registered the important words. "She's stable," he said. "Still experiencing symptoms, but responsive and breathing steadily." That should have been the moment where we all relaxed, but no one did. We waited. And then he said what we didn't expect, though I felt it coming in my gut long before he spoke the words. "She had a reaction to honey." It was clearly identified in her system. Traces consistent with ingestion, not just contact. Her mother gasped. Her father said, "She's allergic." The doctor nodded. "We know. That's what made it so dangerous. She was exposed through a beverage. Tea, we believe." He glanced at his notes. "She drank it shortly before the reaction began. It was prepared by someone else. From what we've been told, she was at a nearby residence. She drank tea that had been previously prepared with honey. The residue was still present in the cup. She drank from it unaware. We're told she consumed it accidentally." That's when the final click echoed through my chest. The puzzle, the suspicion, the shirt in the laundry, the sandwich in my fridge, the silence I'd carried for days. It all locked into place with that one detail. She wasn't home. She hadn't been alone. She'd been at David's house. And she drank from his cup. The same cup he had used to prepare tea. With the honey I gave him. Not poisoned. Not set up. Just fate. The raw kind. The kind no one could predict. The kind that doesn't need revenge because the truth has its own teeth. David was in the hallway. I hadn't seen him come in, but I saw him now through the small glass panel in the consultation room. His head was down, shoulders tight. A nurse passed by him, and he didn't look up. The doctor said she would be moved to a recovery room soon, that we'd be allowed to visit her briefly. Her mother was already crying softly into her scarf. Her father kept shaking his head, saying he didn't understand how this could have happened. "She's so careful," he said. "She knows better." The doctor said sometimes accidents happen, but we all knew that wasn't what this was. It wasn't just about honey. It was about being somewhere she wasn't supposed to be, about trusting someone she shouldn't have trusted, about being so comfortable with a lie that she forgot to watch her own steps. She forgot who she was, forgot what could hurt her, and that forgetfulness had put her in a hospital bed covered in hives, struggling to breathe, barely staying calm. I didn't say anything in that room. I didn't speak to her parents yet. I just sat there with them, hands folded in my lap, waiting for the doctor to finish his report. The silence around us was heavy now, the kind that doesn't come from shock, but from realization. Her parents weren't stupid. They were already piecing it together. Why she was at David's. Why she drank from his glass. Why she was suddenly not where she said she'd been. And why, of all things, she had honey in her system after years of avoiding it like it was poison. Because she didn't expect to be caught. Not this way. Not by something so simple, so small, so innocent. The very thing I gave him to help him feel better ended up being the thing that told the truth when she wouldn't. They let us into her room about 40 minutes later. The swelling in her face had gone down, but the redness was still there, trailing across her arms, blooming at her neck, blotchy and raw. She looked smaller in that bed than I'd ever seen her, tucked under hospital blankets with her head slightly tilted, eyes fluttering open every few seconds like she wasn't sure where she was. Her breathing was steady, though shallow, but no longer struggling. The machines near her beeped softly in rhythm, monitoring every vital like they were waiting for something else to go wrong. Her mother sat down beside her first, brushing hair back from her forehead. Her father hovered at the end of the bed, hands in his pockets, silent. I stood a few steps back from it all, watching the woman I once thought I knew more than anyone in the world lie in that sterile, clinical room, completely exposed, by accident. I didn't speak to her. Not directly. I didn't need to. She looked up once, and our eyes met, and that was enough. There was panic there. Not because she didn't know what had happened, but because she suddenly realized I did. I turned to her parents. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. Honest. I told them where I had seen her car that afternoon not long ago. Parked outside David's house. I told them I'd come home during lunch to surprise her, but I didn't get the chance. I told them I walked up to the door, sandwich in my hand, expecting nothing. I told them about the open window. The sounds. I told them I didn't say anything then because I needed to be sure. So I waited. I watched. I paid attention to the stories she told, to the times she said she was home, to the times she smiled too easily. I told them about the laundry, the shirt I found, the cologne I recognized. I didn't cry. I didn't stammer. I just laid it out, clean and simple, like a checklist of things that should never happen in a marriage. Her mother was staring at the floor by the time I finished. Her father was still frozen at the foot of the bed. Neither of them spoke. And then I told them about the honey, about how David had told me he was feeling sick, about how I'd offered him a jar from our pantry, an old one I didn't even think twice about because it had sat unused for so long. I told them how I brought it over, handed it to him myself, not knowing what it would lead to. I told them how, days later, I got the call that their daughter was being rushed to the hospital after drinking from a cup of tea at David's house. Tea made with honey. The same honey I gave him. The same ingredient that never would have entered her system if she hadn't been where she wasn't supposed to be. If she hadn't been in a place where she felt so safe, so secure in the lie, that she forgot to be afraid of the one thing she always avoided. That was what made it final for me. She'd forgotten to protect herself, because she didn't think the truth would ever find her. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't look at her while I said any of it. I wasn't interested in excuses. I didn't want apologies. That part of me was gone now, burned out like a bulb left on too long. When I finished talking, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wedding ring, and set it down gently on the small table beside her bed. I didn't look at her when I did it. I didn't need to. I turned to her parents, nodded once, and said quietly, "She can explain the rest to you." And then I walked out of that room, out of that hospital, and out of the marriage. No yelling. No revenge. Just the truth, left behind like a trail she couldn't escape. If you were in my place, would you have waited? Or would you have told her everything the moment you heard her through that window?